Great, thank you everybody. It's my great privilege today to talk to you about the work that we've been doing regarding physical activity and sedentary behavior. So I'm going to take you on a journey, and it starts with the famous bus driver study, which was published in The Lancet 70 years ago. At the time when this study was published, the thinking was quite radical. Morris and colleagues showed that bus drivers, whose primary occupation is to sit and drive a bus, had twice the risk of developing heart disease when compared to the bus conductors who'd be walking up and down the aisles of the bus checking the passengers' tickets. So at the time, this was really novel, and this really created the first piece of evidence to show us that indeed too little activity, too much sitting, and not moving enough are both associated with poor health outcomes. Now, in the last 70 years, there's been a lot of work done in this area. And we know now that physical behaviors sit on a continuum, and it's likely that it's the composition of time that we spend within these different intensities of behavior that are related to our physical health. So even though we've done a lot of work in this space, we still have lots more to do. There are 1.4 billion adults who are insufficiently active in the world, and the cost of physical inactivity is a staggering $67 billion to the economy. In Australia, the burden is on both ends of the spectrum. We have too many people sitting for too long of periods at a time, and we have too many people who are insufficiently active. Knowing that this is a really important problem to be studying and the incredible benefits of being sufficiently active, we've been looking at this for the last 33 years in the Raine study. So here's an evolution of all the different ways that we've been trying to measure physical activity over the last 33 years. Now, some participants in the audience might remember filling out these questionnaires about how much time you spend doing physical activity, or how many hours you spend in front of the screen, or how much TV you watch per week. 5 years later, we asked more detailed questions using something called the marker, where we tried to ask people about their physical activity patterns on a computer to try and get more detailed information in smaller time periods. We've used pedometers to find out information about people's step counts. And in the last 10 years, we've moved into the space of using wearable devices and accelerometers to extract enormous amounts of data to give us really detailed information about the volumes and patterns of people's physical activity levels. Now, one of the most amazing things about the Raine study are our participants who come back year after year and are willing to answer the same questions. So even though questionnaires might look a little bit outdated, they provide us with incredibly useful information that we can use to develop trajectories or patterns of behavior and look at how those different patterns might be associated with multiple health outcomes. So as an example of this is some TV viewing trajectories that we published a couple of years ago. This is from the Gen 2 participants. And in this study, we were able to show that there were 3 distinct patterns of TV watchers. The group shown in green had consistently low levels of TV watching over those critical developmental epochs that Trevor alluded to, such as childhood and adolescence. And when we looked at their health outcomes in young adulthood at age 20 and 22, we were able to show that indeed this group had lower body fat percentage and greater bone mass and better self-reported physical health in comparison to the other groups. We've been able to replicate this methodology to look at trajectories of other physical behaviors, such as sleep and sports participation. And what's really amazing about this is that lots of people around the world can measure physical activity and sedentary behavior, but very few people have this rich historical database to be able to develop these longitudinal trajectories. And these are now the largest and longest trajectories of physical behaviors to be used in the world. Lots of groups are interested in working with them because we know the strong associations of physical behaviors with multiple health outcomes. So just as a snapshot, this is the work that's come out of the Raine study just in the last 2 years using some of this physical activity trajectory data and looking at it in association with health outcomes. For example, body composition, mental health, myopia and ocular biometry, multiple other health associations, bone mass. We've looked at epigenetic age acceleration, fitness, and we've looked at artery function and retinal nerve fiber layer thickness. So many groups are interested in using these trajectories, and they provide very, very powerful ways for us to look at the historical associations of patterns of physical behaviors and how they might relate to young adult health and middle-aged adult health as our cohort starts to age. One of the most important things that can happen with some of this research is if we can actually influence policy or influence guidelines. And the World Health Organization recently released their updated guidelines on physical activity and sedentary behavior and used some of our Raine study data to inform those guidelines. So I just think that this is really amazing to think that our study here in Perth is now having impact in terms of the global guidelines that are being distributed around the world. So moving on to some of the work that we've been doing with accelerometers. In 2014, our Gen 2 participants came in and we asked them very kindly if they would stay the night and have a sleep study, and then also go home with 2 accelerometers attached to them. One was on their wrist and one was on their hip. Some of you in the room might remember doing this. Now, accelerometers can provide us much more detailed information about the volume and the pattern of physical activity that would be very hard to get from a questionnaire. Here, for example, you've got person A in the top panel and person B in the bottom panel. Both of these participants accrue a similar amount of moderate and vigorous physical activity, so 77 minutes and 78 minutes. But the way that they accrue this amount of physical activity is quite different. And by looking at the accelerometer trace over the hours of the day, we can see how these patterns play out. So, for example, person A accumulates their physical activity in sort of 3 different bouts spread throughout the day. Whereas person B, it looks like they might go for a nice big run in the morning and accrue all their physical activity up front, and then are pretty sedentary for the rest of the day. Knowing information like this means we can look at whether there are differential health associations associated with these different patterns of accumulation. Is it better to get all your physical activity in one go, or should we be getting it periodically throughout the day? It turns out any minute of movement counts, so anytime you can be physically active, you should take the opportunity to do so. But it's these prolonged bouts of sitting that are particularly deleterious to our health. And so we're starting to look at that in more detail. I'll show you how in a few minutes. The other thing that we can do with the accelerometry data is we can look at the time of day or the day of the week. And these, again, are data from Gen 2, where we looked at how our participants accrued their physical activity over the course of a day. And you can see that just around lunchtime is when they reach the highest amount of physical activity, and this goes down in a pattern that we would expect as the afternoon sets in and people begin their evening routines. We also looked at days of the week, and it turns out Gen 2 participants are most active on Thursdays and least active on Sundays. Having information like this allows us to tailor messages or to give particular meaningful messages to target these behaviors with the ultimate aim of improving health outcomes. Now, as I said to you in the previous slide, it looks like there's quite compelling evidence that those bouts of prolonged sitting are not good for our health. And one of the problems with the accelerometers that we used to use on the hip and the wrist, while they're fantastic for giving us information about the time that people spend in different intensities of behavior, they're not very good at being able to distinguish when we're sitting or when we're standing. And so for the generations follow-up, we've decided to move to a thigh-worn device, where our participants are wearing a device attached to their thigh. And this is enabling us to get very detailed information about the different postures that our participants are spending their day in. And we can really tease out the differences now between sitting and standing and the associations of health outcomes with those 2 postural behaviors. We're also able to get more information about what postures people might be in while they're being physically active. For example, are they cycling? Are they walking fast? Or are they sitting? So we're very excited about this. This data is currently being collected. I can't wait to look at the results, which I hope to be able to share with you in a couple of years. Where to next? We hope to continue to be able to use these rich, detailed bouts of information from this cutting-edge technology that we're able to use in the Raine study. The ultimate aim is to improve health behaviors. So we want to continue this journey, contributing our understanding about how physical behaviors might be related to health outcomes. The Raine study has attracted a lot of attention from international cohorts, as you've heard, and we hope to be able to continue working with them so that we can keep on top of the cutting-edge methods to make sense of this huge amount of data that we're able to collect from our participants. So it's my hope that in the next 50 years, the Raine study will continue the journey, and they'll be driving the bus, and people will be talking about the landmark studies and the seminal findings and the changes that we've been able to encourage to physical behaviors in order to improve health outcomes. So So I just want to thank all my collaborators, particularly Leon Straker, Erin Howie, Peter Eastwood, and Anne Smith, who've contributed a huge amount to this body of work. Of course, the Raine study participants, who are just amazing, just keep coming back year after year. The Raine study staff, who are just so lovely to work with, and of course the funders. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jo. Questions from the audience? Fiona.
Thank you so much, Jo. That was terrific. I actually was taught by Jerry Morris and Austin Heddy, so I'm feeling very old. But I worked in their social medicine unit at the London School of Hygiene after the famous bus study, I have to say.
That's
but
amazing.
Jerry Morris was an absolutely avid exerciser, and he was particularly a swimmer, as am I. So how do you assess the vigorousness of our swimming? Do the monitors work underwater? I want to know.
Yeah, fantastic. That's amazing that you got to work with Jerry Morris. Yes, so the technology is developing quite rapidly. The sensors that we're using now in the generations follow-up that are worn on the thigh are waterproof, and they can, so you'll be pleased to know that, because that's also a really important part that we capture, especially in terms of bone mass and other health outcomes that are associated with swimming as well. So yes, from this generation's follow-up, our participants can wear that monitor 24/7 and not take it off.
Hey, I'm just wondering if you have a sense or are able to categorise the types of vigorous exercise. I'm just wondering if you've noticed a difference, if you've been able to study, the difference between, say, resistance training versus cardio?
So this is where questionnaires are very helpful, because, of course, when you put an accelerometer or a wearable device on a participant, we sometimes lose the contextual information that you're talking about. What are they actually doing when they're being physically active? From the questionnaire data, we're able to look at some of those effects, and I guess it very much depends on the health outcome that you're wanting to look at. There's quite a lot of new evidence to show that these micro bouts of really high intensity, vigorous intensity physical activity are associated with very favorable cardiometabolic outcomes. So we're able to get that from the questionnaires, but not so much from the accelerometry data.
Great, I think that's a wrap up. Great, thank you very much, Jo.
Thank you.